My name is Emily Carter, and I am 31 years old. Before I tell you what happened that night at my family's so-called fancy dinner, I wanted to pause for a moment and think about something. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong? Not by strangers, but by your own family? If you have, then you already know the sting that settles in your chest, the way your throat feels tight when you're trying to smile through humiliation. And if you haven't, well, then maybe my story will open your eyes. I want you to stay with me until the very end, because what began as a humiliating dinner turned into something that none of them, my siblings, my parents, not even I, could have predicted. But before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and also give this story a rating out of 10 when you're done. Your thoughts mean more than you realize. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because I promise you, Outstanding Stories is going to bring you the kind of tales that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. That evening, I was dressed in my best. I wore a pale blue dress that I'd bought with money I saved from my part-time tutoring job, and though it wasn't designer, it fit me well enough that I felt confident walking into that elegant restaurant my family had chosen. It was one of those places where the chandeliers seemed to drip with gold light, and where the staff wore crisp black and white uniforms, moving like shadows across polished floors. Everyone there seemed to belong, everyone but me. My mother had called it a special family gathering, and she insisted that attendance was non-negotiable. My siblings, of course, arrived in style: sleek cars, expensive suits, glittering jewelry that caught the light like stars. I came by bus. When I stepped through the double doors, the maitre d' gave me the same look people always did, as though he wasn't sure I had wandered into the wrong world. I adjusted the strap of my simple purse and lifted my chin, refusing to let my insecurity show. What I didn't know then was that the real humiliation was waiting just a few feet away at the long, beautifully set table in the center of the room. As I walked closer, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble, I saw my family gathered. The long table was draped with ivory linen, candles flickering in golden holders, wine glasses catching the light, silverware arranged with precision that spoke of wealth and importance. My sisters were already seated, their hair styled in elegant waves, makeup done by professionals, laughter spilling from their lips like they had been born to belong there. My brothers wore tailored suits, cufflinks glinting every time they lifted their hands to gesture. My mother sat proudly at the head, her pearls lying gracefully against her neck, while my father leaned back in his chair as though he were the patriarch of some royal dynasty. It looked like the perfect family portrait, until I noticed where my place had been set. At the far end, pushed away from the glow of the candles and closer to the service station, a smaller table waited. It was shorter, round instead of rectangular, with bright plastic cups instead of crystal, and small bread rolls already placed on plates in the shape of smiley faces. And around it, already sitting, were the children, the nieces and nephews, the little cousins, noisy, restless, their chairs too big for their small frames. My seat was there, at the so-called children's table. For a moment, I thought there had been a mistake. My cheeks flushed hot, but I still forced a smile, moving toward the main table. "I think there's been a mix-up," I said lightly, trying to laugh it off. But my sister, Abigail, leaned back and gave me a look filled with cold amusement. "No mistake," she said, her voice silky, dripping with the kind of cruelty she didn't even bother to hide anymore. "Mom thought you'd be more comfortable there." My stomach twisted. My eyes darted to my mother, silently begging for her to correct Abigail, to say this was some kind of tasteless joke. But my mother only raised her eyebrows and gestured toward the children's table with her wine glass. "Yes, dear, sit over there. The adults need to discuss important things tonight, and we didn't want you to feel out of place." The words hit me harder than I could have anticipated. Out of place. Like I was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, a stain on the family's polished image. I glanced toward the children, who were already giggling, tugging at their napkins, asking loudly for juice. My heart pounded. The humiliation was sharp, piercing. I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on me, strangers watching my family degrade me in public. My instinct told me to walk out, to leave them to their golden lives, but something stronger held me there, a desire to prove them wrong, a flicker of defiance buried beneath years of being overlooked. So I smiled tightly, nodded, and forced myself to walk toward that tiny table. The chair felt too small for me, my knees awkwardly bent, and as I sat there among the children, I felt my siblings' laughter rise again, as though I had been the punchline of a joke they had all rehearsed. When the night of the dinner finally arrived, I dressed carefully, trying to strike a balance between modest elegance and something that would make me feel confident. I wore a soft navy dress that brushed just past my knees and a delicate silver chain my mother had given me years ago, before everything between us had grown cold. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, repeating affirmations quietly, whispering, "You belong here. You deserve respect. You are not invisible." The drive to my parents' house was strangely quiet. The evening sun spilled across the road as I replayed countless childhood dinners in my head, the ones where my siblings' laughter always seemed louder than mine, where my words were either ignored or mocked until I stopped offering them. Yet still, I felt that strange tug of hope that maybe tonight would be different, that maybe my family would see me as a woman who had made a life for herself, who deserved more than condescension. The driveway was already packed when I pulled in, expensive cars lined up neatly, as though they had been placed there for display. I parked at the far edge, gripping the steering wheel for a long moment before stepping out, gathering courage the way one might gather a shawl against the cold. Inside, the air was filled with the aroma of roasted duck, garlic mashed potatoes, and sweet pecan pie cooling somewhere in the kitchen. My mother was the first to greet me, her eyes flicking down to my dress, her mouth curving into that familiar polite smile that never reached her eyes. My father appeared briefly, patting my shoulder before drifting back to speak to one of my brothers. Already, I felt the old ache stir in my chest. The dining room had been transformed with crisp white linens, crystal glasses, and candles glowing in golden holders, giving the impression of a scene pulled from some glossy lifestyle magazine. At the head of the long table sat my father, already pouring wine into delicate glasses for my siblings, who filled the seats closest to him, and my mother. Their laughter carried easily, bouncing off the walls in a way that reminded me of years gone by. I moved to pull out a chair near them, but my mother's hand caught mine gently, her tone light yet firm as she gestured toward a smaller table pushed against the far wall. It was set with colorful plates, mismatched cutlery, and 2 booster seats, clearly intended for the youngest cousins. My stomach dropped. "This is where you'll sit tonight," she said softly, as though it were nothing unusual, as though seating me with the children was some unspoken rule. My heart pounded in my ears, heat rising into my face. I glanced at my siblings, who pretended not to notice, though I could see the smirks tugging at their mouths. Reluctantly, I lowered myself into the small wooden chair, the legs wobbling slightly under my weight. My knees knocked awkwardly against the low table, my dress crumpled uncomfortably, and for a moment, I felt transported back to being 10 years old, the unwanted afterthought. The children giggled beside me, innocent in their joy, completely unaware of the cruelty that had just unfolded. I forced a smile, though inside my spirit cracked like fragile glass. I sat there at the children's table, trying desperately to hide the flush of humiliation that burned across my cheeks. My fingers fiddled with the edge of the cheap napkin they had tossed onto the little plate in front of me, while at the main table, my siblings clinked their crystal glasses and carried on conversations about careers, investments, and vacation plans. I wanted to melt into the floor, to disappear, to be anywhere but in that moment. Yet I forced myself to breathe, to sit upright, to smile at the little ones who, with their unfiltered innocence, asked me silly questions about cartoons and whether I liked the toy dinosaurs one of them had brought along. I answered them gently, grateful at least that they saw me as someone worth speaking to. But every sound from the adult table sliced into me like a reminder of my supposed unworthiness. The worst part wasn't just the separation, it was the way nobody even acknowledged it. No one looked over to apologize, to explain, or even to soften the blow. It was deliberate, calculated, a silent proclamation that I didn't belong among them. I chewed my food quietly, each bite tasting like ash in my mouth, while my siblings laughed at inside jokes that I was excluded from. My mother occasionally glanced in my direction, but only briefly, as if checking that I was behaving properly. My father never looked at me once. I thought about leaving, about standing up and walking out, but a stronger part of me whispered, "Stay. Endure this. Let them see that you won't break, even when they push you to the margins." Halfway through the meal, one of my brothers raised a toast, his voice booming with pride as he spoke about his new promotion. Everyone clapped and cheered, their glasses raised high, the sound of their validation ringing like a bell that excluded me. I wanted to offer my own congratulations, but by the time I found the courage to speak up, their attention had already shifted to another sibling story. My words caught in my throat, swallowed before they were even born. It was then I realized how invisible I had become in this family dynamic, like a ghost at the edge of a life I was supposed to belong to. One of the children tugged on my sleeve, offering me a bite of their dessert with sticky fingers, and I smiled genuinely for the first time that night. At least to them, I wasn't invisible. Still, the humiliation gnawed at me, twisting deeper as the evening stretched on. I remembered being a girl, yearning for a place at the adult table, watching my older siblings speak and laugh with authority, wishing one day it would be me. Now, as a grown woman in my 30s, I finally had that chance, only to be denied as though I were still the child they had once dismissed. My chest ached with the weight of it all, and a question rose inside me. Why do I keep coming back here? Why do I still hope they'll treat me differently? But another voice, quieter and stronger, replied, "Because deep down, you know your worth. And one day they will too." The evening dragged on, every tick of the clock echoing louder in my chest than the clatter of silverware or the chatter around the grand dining table. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to remind myself that I was 32 years old, a grown woman with a career and dignity of her own, yet here I was being treated like a leftover, like the kind of person who didn't deserve even the simple honor of sitting with her family. I watched as waiters glided gracefully around the adult table, serving fine wines and elegantly plated entrees, while our small side table of children was given watered-down juice and simple dishes that lacked the grandeur of what the others enjoyed. It was an orchestrated display, subtle enough that outsiders wouldn't think twice, but painfully deliberate to anyone who understood the politics of my family. I could see the smirk on my eldest sister's lips when she leaned in to whisper something to her husband, both of them laughing softly while their eyes flicked in my direction. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to sit straighter, to take slow bites, to project calm even though inside I was trembling. Every cell in my body screamed with the injustice of it, yet another part of me whispered that this humiliation was a test. A test of strength, of patience, of self-worth. If I snapped, if I stormed out, they would use it as proof that I was immature, unworthy of respect. So I stayed. I stayed even as I felt the burn of tears behind my eyes. I blinked them away, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. The children laughed around me, sharing jokes and passing crayons across the table, and in some twisted way, I found comfort in their presence. They didn't judge, didn't measure me against impossible standards. To them, I was simply Aunt Sarah, someone who listened, someone who smiled. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Perhaps it was better to be loved honestly by children than to be scorned silently by adults who should know better. The humiliation reached its peak when dessert was served. The adults were given golden trays of delicate pastries, rich chocolate mousse in crystal cups, and fruits carved into elegant shapes. At our table, the waiter plopped down a plate of cookies as if we were still in kindergarten. The children clapped happily, oblivious, but my heart twisted at the blatant inequality. My siblings' laughter rose again as they toasted one another, their joy bouncing off the chandeliers like cruel reminders that I didn't belong. I felt a wave of shame so intense I had to press my napkin against my lips to keep from trembling. But in that moment, something shifted in me. A strange calm washed over, as though my spirit had decided it was done playing their game. I looked at the children, smiling as they nibbled cookies, and I thought, they can try to make me small, but my worth doesn't shrink because they refuse to see it. I had spent my entire life waiting for their validation, craving their acknowledgement, bending myself into pieces to fit into their narrow version of who I should be. And yet, here I was, still dismissed, still overlooked. The realization struck me like lightning. I didn't need their table to define me. My life was full outside of these walls. I had friends who valued me, colleagues who respected me, and a small apartment that felt more like home than any dinner here ever did. My siblings might sit at a polished table, but I sat with the knowledge that I had survived so much more than they could ever imagine. That strength, invisible to them, was the very thing that made me powerful. As the night drew on, I began to study them with new eyes. My eldest brother boasted about his new investment property, his words dripping with arrogance, but I noticed the twitch at the corner of his jaw, the nervous way he checked his phone when he thought no one was watching. My sister bragged about her lavish vacations, but I saw the strain in her smile, the way her husband barely glanced at her when she spoke. These were people desperate to project an image of success, but underneath, I sensed the cracks. And suddenly, I pitied them. Their need to belittle me wasn't about my worth, it was about their fear. Fear that if they looked too closely, they might see their own insecurities reflected back. They wanted me at the children's table not because I was lesser, but because my quiet strength threatened the fragile foundation of their egos. Realizing this gave me a power I hadn't felt in years. I straightened my shoulders and engaged with the kids fully, laughing with them, coloring on the paper mats, listening intently to their stories. For the first time that night, I wasn't pretending, I was genuinely present, and that authenticity felt like liberation. Across the room, I noticed my father finally glance in my direction, his brow furrowing slightly, as though surprised that I wasn't sulking, wasn't broken. That glance was enough to remind me. They could try to humiliate me, but they could not control me. By the time dinner ended and everyone began to leave, I felt a strange mix of heaviness and lightness. Heaviness from the pain of once again being treated as less, but lightness from the realization that I no longer needed their approval to define my worth. As we gathered our coats, my eldest sister made a snide remark about me, looking comfortable with the kids, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled warmly and replied, "Yes, they're the best company I've had all night." Her face faltered, just slightly, but it was enough. I walked out of that house with my head high, my dignity intact, and a newfound clarity burning inside me. This wasn't just about one dinner, it was about a lifetime of being pushed aside, diminished, and underestimated. And tonight, I had finally seen through the illusion. My story wasn't about being the forgotten daughter. It was about finding strength in unexpected places, about realizing that respect begins within. To anyone listening right now, I want to say this. No matter who tries to push you to the margins, never forget that your worth is not determined by their table. It is written in the resilience of your spirit. And if this story resonates with you, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and give this story a rating from 1 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe to Outstanding Stories for more powerful, emotional journeys that remind us of our strength. Because sometimes, being seated at the children's table is the very thing that shows us how grown we've truly become.